Okay, first up we have Tegan. All right, yeah, this is looking really good. The fizz inside the letters looks really nice. Let's watch that again. And the pink looks good. You might consider just larger letters. I imagine it filling up this kind of area on the screen. Um, and that looks good. And it's rolling better, but it still slips. If you look at the end, it slips a little bit, which isn't necessarily wrong. It just seems like it would be better if it didn't just slip. I like the lettering. I like the little damage bits in both the lettering and in the cartridge here. I just wanted to show an example of rolling something and seeing if we can do it where it doesn't slip. This isn't a perfect circle, but it's close enough. The first thing is to make sure the anchor point is in the center, and you can use the move anchor point tool here if it's not, but it was fine, so I'll just leave it there. And let's go P for position and move this over here and set a keyframe, and let's say, I don't know, 3 seconds, and move it over here. Okay, and I'll just go to this one and hit N as in Nancy to end the work area, hit 0 on the numeric keypad, and we can see the movement there. So then let's do R for rotation, set a keyframe, go to the end, and I'll start out by just guessing. Let's say this is, degrees of rotation, and it's going to be rotating in the negative direction, and this is whole rotations around. So let's just start with -2, I guess, and see what that looks like. So that's what I mean by slipping, like it's rotating more than it's moving right now. So let's go to this one and decrease that some so it's not going as far. That's going to be like 1.5 turns there. That's a lot closer now. Let's hit 0 to preview it. Actually, that looks pretty good. Let's look a little closer. It's still maybe slipping a little bit, but so I might go a little bit more. See it now. Yeah, I buy that. So the idea is just to adjust the end rotation until it doesn't appear to be slipping. The other thing to watch out for, I'm going to hit Shift P to see my position rotation at the same time, is if you do something on these keyframes like easy ease, it's going to make this harder. So I think let's just fit this again. What you'll see here is that, see, it slips at the beginning and clearly slips at the end. So unfortunately, easy ease is going to make this harder because of the acceleration and deceleration you can see in those points. You can try to do it the same here now, and maybe you'll be lucky that it'll look, because it'll also be slow at the either end with the rotation. Well, that's pretty convincing. So if you do want to do the ease in, ease out, I think that might be a good workflow, which is to get the rotation and position looking right with linear keyframes, and then switch to, it still seems like it's slipping a bit at the beginning, maybe, but pretty close. It doesn't really bother me too much. Um, and then switch over to easy ease. And by the way, if you control click on these, you can switch them back to linear again. And that's Bezier if you control click twice. But anyway, so that's just a quick thing to show you what I was talking about with the slipping. Next is Vanessa. Sorry. So that's looking vastly improved from the last version. This is a much cleaner and simpler logo. I'm liking the idea of the panda breathing and sleeping here. However, it would be better if is that the tail? I guess that's the tail, but at least the legs should be stationary while the body expands and contracts. And I guess if that's the tail, that could move with it. But I don't think I don't think this should scale and move with the body when it's breathing. And maybe go up more than you go out. Don't just scale evenly. And adding a little kind of like twitch to an arm or something could be kind of a cute touch, like they're dreaming something and they're running in their sleep or something. There's something a little odd about that fade. There's like a pop at the end of the fade. I wonder if it's that the something doesn't fade evenly. Take a close look at that frame by frame. The shadow thing worked out really well. I think that you could hold longer on the text by reducing this period of where there's not anything. You could shorten that and then lengthen how long the text is there, because the text feels to go by a little bit fast and there's a little bit blank. And I think this text is good. I just think that is it partially transparent? Um, it looks like it's partially transparent or something, which looks odd. The burnout is very nice, and that worked out quite well. I think maybe drop the transparency part of it. But yeah, this came out nicely. Just make sure you fade out at the end, and there's a couple other little touches, but yeah, it's a very much improved from the last version. Next we have Adni. Yeah, another one that's much improved from the original. If you'll remember, the last time we had sort of this very orange icon of a sun, and this sun is much more appealing and believable and really blends nicely into the image. So that worked out really well. There is something of a kind of, the sun kind of brightens and then it really freezes a bit abruptly. So maybe kind of keep that increase of brightness going, but just very slowly, so there's not that abrupt stop there. Lightning looks good. The flash looks good. Let's watch it with the sound again, because that helps with the timing. That cut to black seems abrupt, so if you are going to go to black here, maybe do a fade down rather than a cut. But then we come back to this image, which makes me think, well, maybe you didn't need to go to black at all. Maybe you just stay on this. And that last lightning transition cut to black background works quite well. So yeah, this came together well. Good work. Next up is Angela. Okay. Um, so let's just take another look at that. So I think it's good that you straighten this, and you had a lot of side to side before. It would be okay to add a touch of it, just so it's not perfectly straight. But I think it's okay going straight up too. Um, the arms and legs dangling is a really nice touch, and that worked out very well. Can also see the blink there, right there. I think the way you did the blink looks odd, 'cause the way the eyes are kind of moving down. Rather than that, it could be as simple as like just a green circle covering the eye that expands from the top to the bottom. So if you just had a green circle that was like scaled to 0 here and had its anchor point at the top and then scaled to 100% to cover the eye and scaled back down, that would have done it. And I think the way you've done it maybe was actually more complicated and but also not quite right. Um, but the chin moving for the rivet works well. So I think overall though that's good, and the fact that you went as far as kind of having an animated puppet is really nice. Might just looking at this again, I don't know. I might try a different font for the studios because this is so kind of fat letter and cartoony, and then here you have this like serif font, and maybe even just like a sans serif font. Um, anyways, something to play with. Not that important. A really nice touch would be when the balloon stops. If the frog and the O went up, the balloon stops and the frog and the O went up a little bit and then back down, kind of like a little bounce, to show the sort of follow through of animation. Would have looked good. Would look good. The presents goes by a little fast, and the smoke. I might go for just finding some stock footage of a smoke that's sort of this is very big and very blurry and which isn't necessarily bad, but somehow it seems very strong and a little bit distracting from the text somehow. So maybe something a little less filling the screen, like maybe if it's more wispy and partially filling the screen, and also maybe not so big and blurry and contrasty. Um, it's okay. It almost has a feel more like water than smoke, like rippling water. So you could play with just different, find a different stock footage smoke and for the background. And yeah, you kept it simple for the end. I think if you could have blown some of the holes in the crossfire image, and that could have been as simple as having those holes filled in with the wood texture, and then on the timing with a gunshot sound effect put on just having circles appear. It's that simple. So you could have done a simple kind of gunshot approach for that, just to add more interest to it, because you kept it pretty simple for the second half. But the floating frog is pretty strong, and you could tell you put a lot of work into that. So good job. Okay, next up is Lindsay.
There ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body
Okay. Um, it says that you removed the white in the cowboy silhouettes, but I feel like I'm still seeing it in here. So maybe take another look at that. But let's watch this again. So it's good that the cat goes up first, though I think that it should land, could arc and come back down, and feel like it's more part of the title and logo, whereas here, lying on its side, it looks odd. And I think you could put more kind of time and care into this drawing where you have the very thick outline and very thick eyebrows, and it just looks really kind of hand scrawled. And I suppose you might say that's some of the charm of it, but I think it would look better being like a cleaned up, you know, more consistent with the line width and um, image. Because I think you have this very clean looking toaster with nice lines and shapes on it, and then when you see this very hand scrawled looking cat, it doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't. It just stands out as being looking a little rough. So I think if this was a nicer logo, it would look better, and then also landing in a spot that makes it feel like that's where it's supposed to go rather than landing on its side. And then I probably would just fade everything down equally rather than having one thing disappear at a time. And here's the bits of white I was talking about, like along these edges that make it, it just looks, has this, it doesn't look intentional.
There ain't no grave
It helps if you put them, when you're moving something quicker, it can be good to put motion blur on.
can hold my body
And maybe do the ease in, ease out thing on that text
down.
so it settles
There
sooner.
ain't no grave
This is a bit tight to this side.
can hold my
And it's interesting when he moves, you get this white outline here, and it looks like there's a gap in the gun there. So, though I don't quite remember that from the
can
last
hold my
version,
body
so
down.
you might clean up some of those bits. But yeah, and then just make sure. Did you fade out at the end? No, let's just watch it again.
There ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down.
Yeah, just make sure to fade out at the end. So, yeah, I mean, a few little improvements could make this nicer. It works now, but it could be a little better. All right, next up we have Karen. All right. Let's take another look. So you've got the fallen star thing. It goes here and then it abruptly changes from its vertical movement to its horizontal. And I think that what would be nicer is kind of a more rounded movement, so it doesn't suddenly switch from the vertical to the horizontal. And also, you typically will want to have text stop and rest at some point, so the audience can read it. Um, the star does have kind of a look of your stars in the background. It could be interesting rather than having it glide in, to have it maybe start from say one of these, and like scale up so it feels like it's that star growing. Um, and this spinning, I think, is not working that well. I think it does not really justify it, in a sort of storytelling way. Like an example of spinning is like, I think someone did one where it's like the bullet is hitting something and it's making it spin. Like you sort of want to, kind of like a story justification for spinning, but this one feels like it's spinning just for the sake of spinning, and it makes it hard to read because most of the time it's upside down, and it never comes to rest. Um, and the light beams have some good potential, so um, that's working okay for this. Um, yeah, and I think that it could be interesting to try and do more with the background. Like, for example, if you did something to give it a feeling of depth, like adding different layers of stars in there with transparency, and then kind of maybe like a few different layers, and then giving it a feeling of depth and like a somewhat of a camera movement where some of the stars are moving faster than others, representing them being closer to the camera, and the ones further in the background representing the back ones. I think if right now the background feels very static, very still, and you're trying to get all the movement out of the lettering, but the kind of the spinning and the movement of the lettering isn't necessarily you know justified by kind of a thematic or storytelling point, so it looks a little random right now. I mean, I understand, okay, it's Fallen Star Studios. I think that makes sense, but I still would have that come to rest there. But the spinning on presents doesn't necessarily make sense, and the background's feeling a little static for the whole thing. So, anyways, just if there's a few ideas of how you can improve it, but you definitely got the basics of the assignment, and remember the fade to black at the end as well. Next up, we have Matt. Yeah, yeah, those are really good improvements on this one. Let's watch that again. The faded edge on the spotlight really helps quite a bit. I think the timing works well. I think there's just enough time to read it. It's cutting it a little close, but it's all right. The backdrop looks good. And that bit of shine on the letters is nice, and it also adds to the sort of idea of being robbed, like you're stealing something of value, something that's shiny like silver or something like that. So I think that has kind of a storytelling element to it. Um, I think it's good to go left to right and right to left. Yeah, I think it's fine. I think it can be read fine. Um, and maybe just make sure you complete the fade to black by the end, and you could also have it shift off the screen. Although sometimes I should check because sometimes these players don't show the last frame. Let me try downloading it. Let's watch it in VLC. Okay, so that's just one of those web player issues, so ignore that. And if anybody else was wrong about your fade out completing, then oh, it looks like some didn't fade out at all. Yeah, just a tiny little thing. Do you see that little thing come back again there? So look out for that. But yeah, overall, this is a very nice piece. Next up, we have Cody. That's good. I want to watch this in Vimeo just to check something. So yeah, I think that the timing of the gunshot sound it it it's in the middle of the gun spinning, so I would tend to say it should be just right at the beginning of it spinning, as if that sound is what sets the gun spinning in motion. It doesn't look like you've got motion blur on it, and I think, as you can see, there's no blur here, and it's spinning very fast. So I think that would be a better look for the gun spinning if you turn on motion blur. I like the different speeds of the bullets, and I think some might be going a little bit faster than they need to, but it's all right. And then again, I would probably have motion blur on these. Would be an improvement. Um, and I think that logo works well. Although with this a little bit, I feel like I'm seeing a little bit of pixelation on the letters. And what I'm wondering is if this is like a bitmap image that you've scaled up. Rather, ideally you'd have very clean text if you created the text inside of After Effects using the text editor in there, and you can know it's all vector and sharp. Or if you're going to make it in Photoshop, it needs to start out either exactly the right size or larger. But what I fear has happened is that you started with text that was smaller and scaled it up, and it's more noticeable, in fact, on this one, where those edges are looking very jagged and not clean. So it's less of a problem here just because they're all right angles. You don't notice it on but anywhere we have a curve or an angle, we're seeing very big aliasing. So again, if you make the text in Photoshop, make sure it's exactly on an image that's 1920 by 1080. Um, if that's the full size of this, or if it's 1280 by 720, make sure it's exactly 1280 by 720. And then or if you just use the text editor inside of After Effects, then you won't have any problem at all with that. The smoke is good in the background. Maybe you could have brought in the smoke earlier. But yeah, there's some really good elements here. Just those few fixes, I think, would make this thing really nice. Next up is Kelly. Okay, this might one. I'm seeing a lot of compression on the image, so I think let's take a look at this, download it, and see if that looks any. So that's much better with the uncompressed version. Um, I think that you've got that movement back and forth. It's not that justified by a purpose, but the other thing you might consider is that you've got some transparency on this, which makes it a little bit hard to read. And also, you have this very neutral space in this middle stripe here, which might be a better place to put text than this more kind of contrasty area at the top. So that could be something to play with. You've got a wipe across, which is fine, and it looks like you've added a rain effect, which is okay. But one thing you might consider is replacing the sky because there's a couple issues really, which is that you've got a sky that does not. If you replace the sky with rain clouds rather than these kind of clouds, the rain would be a little bit more believable. And you do have a bright kind of sunset looking sun hitting it this from the side, and it is possible to be sunny while it's raining if the sun's off to the side, like below the rain clouds or something, which would also actually justify the visibility of the rain. You could even make the rain a little bit golden because it's getting hit by the sun from the side. But it is a pretty 2D kind of slap down looking effect because obviously the rain's not hitting the ground, and we're not seeing evidence of the ground looking wet. So it it's you know, really doing that for real to have the rain look believable is challenging. And I'm also not exactly sure. You've got Road Studios Presents, and you have a road, so that kind of makes sense. And then it's raining, which is an interesting effect. I guess I just don't know sort of the purpose of that. It's just an image and it's raining on it, and it doesn't necessarily tie in with the other stuff. So be thinking of kind of the theme of the company name and logo, and what how it sort of helps tell the story of that in a memorable way. And right now this feels a little bit random, although the rain looks okay. And then you do the clock wipe, which is okay. Short film by. It's a nice image, but it'd be good to get some more movement on there. Like maybe you've got that sun in the shot. What you might try to do is, if you painted that out and just put in blue, and it would be, you could even probably paint out these pretty well and just have like the beginning of the sun there, and then like kind of fade that up over where you've painted that out. You could kind of do a sunrise thing, which might be nice, just to give a little bit of motion. And again, you've got that movement from left to right, which feels a little fast and abrupt, and again, doesn't feel like it has sort of a movement. And then this your now your third wipe type. So you've had the diagonal wipe, the clock wipe, and I don't know what they call this, like sort of this blinds looking thing. And it just looks like just a little bit too many styles thrown in there. It's kind of looks like, oh, I'm just trying the different menu of wipes rather than trying to justify it with sort of a thematic or storytelling thing. If this is meant to appear like it's on the paper, which it kind of looks like it's supposed to, then you're going to want to have it at the same angle as the paper with the same font and kind of this sort of gray, somewhat faded look to it, rather than just slapped on there. And it doesn't look like a font that matches the time or theme of like the Western. And if you're going to use these stock images that have these kind of um, overlay things on them, get in there and paint them out. Even selecting it and use a content aware fill on each of these should quickly clean most of those up by themselves. Other than that, you can use the rubber stamp tool if you want to do that. And you've got this sort of lightning thing here, which is interesting, but I think that you might use a sound effect that kind of draws attention to it. Maybe the lightning could make the text appear, which again should appear at the angle of the paper and maybe with some of the distortion of the bends of the paper rather than and in a matching font. So yeah, you have a few good elements in here, some good images, some good text, but I just think you could do more work to get it put together in a way that, yeah, it just feels like a stronger piece. Next up is Megan. Okay, there's some improvements over the last version, which is good. Let's watch this again. I think that the timing of the drop could be a little faster. You could look at the reference. You could just drop something in your own home and take video reference, or look at the reference of something dropping. But um, the fall is okay. I think the bounce looks sort of slow motiony. So I think if that was, like just much quicker, it'd be better. I think that I still think you could find a font that looks a little better. It looks a little, I don't know, like that G is very strange and small, and a lot of inconsistencies in the sizes and heights. So it looks like, to me, I would see if there's just a higher quality font you can use. And there's also some inconsistencies. If A is going to be capitalized, as it probably should, probably have short and film, or maybe just have a lowercase and then a short film I, and then have your name as it is. But it looks a little odd to have a capitalized and then short and film lowercase. That looks good. The all caps is a little better with that font. So, and then make sure you do a fade out in the end. I think that I can see that you removed the um, little forearm there, which was probably a good choice for the drawing that you had. Um, Another thought might be like if this body disappeared and the skull fell to a position where it felt like it was a consistent part of this text. So what if the this dinosaur character scooted in, this fell to, let's say, next to the P in production, and then the text kind of moved up or something and came together, and you were left with just the Scully Productions and the skull next to it, and that would feel a little more iconic. I think that the leaving the headless dinosaur in here is not doing much good. So maybe if it, like, after it slid in, if it quickly faded away and then Scully and Productions moved closer together with the skull as part of it, that would feel like a more clean and iconic logo without the headless dinosaur in it. Yeah, and the kind of overlays and transparencies are better, except for right here at the end, because I'm seeing kind of that line there. So what might be happening is there might be some transparency on the back, seeing through to something behind it. So make sure it's just fading to solid black at the end and completes the fade to black. Okay, next is Nitzen, if I'm pronouncing that right. I think this is another one that would benefit from downloading it. All right, this is an example of where I think the motion blur really improves the look of how those spin in. I think, any of you with fast motion would probably benefit from adding the motion blur. It just looks much nicer. The timing with the sound effects on this one really comes together well. I think that the S definitely stands out more the way you've done it. I'm wondering if you could just, after the S comes out, just fade out the rest of the flower. Um, and this works well. Let's turn that volume down here. That looks good the way that comes in. I think that it needs to hold on the screen a little bit longer. And you have the one eating that, but I think you could skip one motion here, which is, so I see the title, that's clear. The one eats the rest of the title, and that's a good gag. But I think then you come back to this one, which is like, well, why am I seeing the word one now? Is that some part of some next time? It's just a little confusing, and it's not necessary to come back to that form of the one again. So what I think would be better, and you have this interesting spinning out and converting to dust thing. So I think what would have been stronger is you've got that, the one does that, the one bites it, and then have this deformed version of the one turn to dust and spin out, rather than having it come back to the to that. So I would just skip that and have the previous thing split out to dust, and I think that would work better. And then that would also leave you a little bit more time to hold on this title, which felt like it went by too fast. But yeah, really good, nice one. I think this feels a little bit low contrast and desaturated to me, and I think that was on purpose. And it's probably good that it's not too high contrast and saturated to distract from the text. But right now, it has a sort of a washed out feeling, and you might play with bringing some of that color and contrast back. But overall, yeah, this is a good piece, and it turned out nicely and got some clever stuff going on there. Next up is Chris. All right, so there's some nice stuff in here. Let's take another look. I think the letters showing up one by one suits this. The cocking back here is a nice touch. And if we look closely at that, we can see, yeah, there's a nice cartoony flash, which works well really quickly. Matches the style of the silhouetted gun, and I can see you put some motion blur on the bullet, which is good. Works well. Yeah, there's some good elements here. It's pretty clean and simple, but there's no sort of major problems with it. You might think of, I don't know, doing something to give it some depth. For example, maybe the letters are casting a shadow on that kind of textured background, and even the shadows could have like a little slight drift of movement to them as if the light source is changing. Just something to give it a little bit more life and movement and depth might bring this up a bit. But there's really no major flaws with this one. It's just looking for ways to kind of flesh it out a bit and take it further. Next up is Jay. Okay, so looks like let's just take another look at this. Looks like the drawing of the bird and the nest have improved a lot. Um, what's a little strange is that the nest moves to the bird rather than the bird moving to the nest. And I think the other thing, I think an eye is going to be important for this one, and also if you can work on the movement so it just feels like it's either hopping or flapping up to get in there, but here it just kind of freezes and it's cut off by the top of the screen, which looks odd. So overall, I think this could use work, and the legs are looking kind of quick and rough, and I think the drawing could use some more detail as well, and the edges aren't that clean. So I think that this could be improved both in the illustration and in the motion to just make it feel more bird-like. Um, and then you hold on for that for quite a bit. We're already at 11 seconds here, and then there's quite a bit of black. There's too much black there. So because you just do half a second of black at the most, but it looks like we have maybe 2 or so seconds. I think that the quick zoom in of the slick shot works well, but what you might do is you could have either like a gap between this and the T, or have like a regular O and then hear the gunshot and then add this kind of bullet hole look, just to make it a little more dynamic. And I mentioned before, it's a little bit too stretched out and a little bit crowding the edges here, so you might just sort of scale that in a little bit so it's not quite so stretched and also not crowding the edges quite so much. So yeah, but I think the big thing to work on is just the look and the animation of this could use more improvement to be something, you know, that you'd want as the icon of your production company. All right, we have Craven next. Okay, some nice improvements on this one. Let's take another look. Yeah, so I think that the text coming on, it looks like you've added some to the moving, but I think you could keep going with that and maybe not so quite so it sort of abrupt kind of chunks, but maybe fading more gradually. It can still start and stop a little bit, but I think there should be movement to it. Whereas right now it seems to just appear in chunks rather than feeling like it's being drawn on, which I think it might be nicer to kind of have that gradually scaling up mass to make it gradually appear like it's being drawn there. And the shadow is pretty cool. It's a nice effect and it works well for this. It doesn't necessarily look like an Old West gun, but that's all right. It's not that big of a deal. The only thing that might be nice, I think, let me just listen to the timing of this a little bit because it felt. Yeah, the timing feels a little bit off. That next click, I think that the first gunshot timing seems alright, but that second click comes too early, so you might scooch that back. And that second gunshot also came too early. So play with the timing of your sound effects to make them match the shadow image for. And when you have the actual gunshot sound, I would pick a bigger and louder one and maybe do some kind of flash. Either, again, you're not going to see the shadow of a muzzle flash. Instead, the muzzle flash would actually light up the screen, but you can kind of do maybe just some very quick flash, maybe some big gradation thing here that sort of just lightens the area that would be near the muzzle, and just over, fading up, flashing in and fading down over like 3 frames. It's a quick flash kind of thing that covers maybe sort of that area, being brightest in the center and fading to the edge. Might be a nice touch with a louder gunshot. And then make sure you fade to black at the end. So yeah, I think this is improved, and I think with a few more touches, it could be even better. Jocelyn. All right, so not too much change, but I think there were some good choices here, like lowering the text so it doesn't interfere with the moon. I think that helped. I think that the this first part is calling out for some kind of sound. Maybe you get sort of the spooky ambience of the woods, the wolf howling kind of thing, because you have this sort of vampire thing, dead of night, spooky woods. So, wind whistling through the trees, that kind of thing could help. Um, yeah, and just thinking about what could make this a little bit more dynamic, what could bring it to life, give it some movement. Um, it doesn't have to be too much movement, but maybe even just some mist that's sort of passing behind it to kind of give it a little bit of life could be good. And again, I talked about maybe having a blur on this where maybe you start out in focus, and then then it goes out of focus before the dot comes on, because it's a little bit. Let's get that volume down. It's a little bit busy with this text and all the pills and this full sharp focus. And I mentioned maybe trying something besides a script, which you can have script titles, but it's challenging. So and then it looks like, I wonder if that fades to black completely or not. But right now it doesn't look like it's fading to black, and also make sure that the audio fades to the at the end as well as the image. So yeah, I think that yeah, there's good quality images here. I think having the pills blur over text is going to make the text easier to read and sharper. And you can also, maybe as it blurs, it sort of darkens a little bit too or something, and then the text is going to pop a lot more. So you could try something like that. And then again, maybe some smoke or mist that kind of is drifting behind here could help bring it to life a little bit. Next up is Ray. Okay, got a lot of changes here. So let's take another look. So I think conceptually, with the idea of season films and going through the seasons, and you have film, I think you've got a concept now, which is good and it's clear we're moving through the seasons. So the concept came together. I think that your execution of it, this kind of flickering is very, it's just kind of jarring and I don't know, makes it a little bit hard to watch. So I would remove that flickering. And I kind of get, oh, that's supposed to be the flickering of film, but right now it's just too sort of flashing on and off. I guess this feels like something sort of spinning behind there. And then it looks like you've got this white outline here, and then suddenly it pops and goes to this black. I would just try not to have the outline at any point, and just leave it clean. And you've got this film strip, which is a good concept, but one thing is that you wouldn't be able to see the image through the sprocket holes. That would just be, transparent to the background rather than seeing an image behind it. So you might consider, putting something else behind there. And then it looks like the text has been stretched vertically, which is generally a no-no, but it's not aligned. The bottom of season is higher than the bottom of films. You'll probably want to get those aligned up. So I just think there's a lot you could do to make this more appealing. And again, I think it's good that you've got the concept matching the name, but I think just some of the execution could be done differently and in a more appealing way. And then again, it's film, so the burnout makes sense. But it would be nice to hear some sound with this. You could, for example, have the sound of an old projection camera, and then that projection camera jamming so that the film melts. And or you could have seasonal sounds, and I think this is okay. But I think we're seeing a little bit of kind of a low res thing that's been scaled up quite a bit. So if you could start with a higher res image, you might get cleaner lines. And this is interesting how that's growing. I think that, whoops, keep doing that. The text at the end is a little bit problematic. Take another look. So you have, again, that white outline on black isn't holding up well, so maybe just solid black. And you have the lowercase, and if the is in a title, the T is gonna be uppercase. And the comes up, and then the this is already fading out by the time that shows up. So rather than having these fade out, what I would say is have them stay on the screen until all the text is up, so we can see the whole thing as one title, because it just goes away much too quickly. And then the different size text and the staggering is, it just doesn't look like a clean finished look. So I would try to go for something a little simple, the quick handed bandit, all text being the same size, I think would just look a little classier and more, clean and easy to read. So you might take another try at that. So yeah, more concept going on, that's good. But maybe, trying some different approaches would help. Okay, next is Chris. Okay, so there's some nice improvements on this one. I think the cloud is much better. The cloud stuff at the beginning is much better than it was. There's something funny where you start with this and then the overlay fades in. Rather than doing that, just have that overlay there from the beginning, because it seems odd that, that suddenly that jumps in, that overlay moving clouds over the still background one. And then it really gets very bright here. And I think that while it was still a little bit darker, and it felt like you could see some more detail and contrast, and then here it really blows out to where you've got whole areas at 100% white, which is, it's not that you can't have areas at 100% white, but when you have so much of it, it feels a little bit blinding, and we lose all the details here. So if you could bring that back down a little bit to where it looked, you know, around here, um, it was much more there was much more detail and texture going on than here, where you've lost a lot of it. The movement is nice, and what you might even try to find is, rather than having just a still background and a moving foreground, is if they're both moving, it might be even better. But this already helps. But again, I wouldn't bother having it fade up. I'd have it there to begin with, but just don't go to that blinding white. And it's nice that this kind of blends with the clouds, or feels like it does a little bit. And then you've got this smoke here, which is looking good, and the spinning things that reveal letters. Yeah, I mean, it works pretty well. You could consider having some bullet holes in these letters, I think, because with the concept being that, if the concept is that the gun shot those things which made them spin, then you would expect to see some bullet holes at the end when they come to rest. So you could consider doing that. But yeah, definitely much improved from the last version, and there's a couple tweaks you could make it better, but it works pretty well.